Let me ask you a question and feel free to answer right now in the comments. You don't even need to watch the rest of the video, just answer me this in the comments. What was the last AAA comedy game you've seen released? Let me rephrase it. What was the last comedy game pushed by a big company, by a big publisher, by your Ubisofts, by your Electronic Arts, your Activision? What was the last one that you remember? A lot of you are gonna say Far Cry Blood Dragon. Some of you may say that it was the Deadpool game or Brutal Legend. How many years has it been since those games? How many other games have those companies pushed out? Tens, hundreds maybe? And comedies are not really what you would call all that often found. They're rare, disproportionately represented in a negative way in the plethora of new titles that we find on the market each year. At least that's how I feel. That's how I felt since 2012 when I wrote an article about it and forgot about it. It was a neat article, started with a joke about how many engineers do you need to change a light bulb, and the answer was stupid. But I kind of feel that we're in the same situation we were 6 years ago. Comedy is a hard thing to make when you're trying to do it properly, because comedy is not telling a joke. That's being a comedian. That's something different. You can't make a game simply on the premise of, oh, I'm gonna tell jokes in it. You're gonna have a game that has humor in it, that has jokes in it. Just because there's a joke in Mass Effect 3 doesn't mean that the game's a comedy when everybody in the game dies horribly and it's made to evoke emotion from you that is more akin to sadness, to grief. I think it's Judd Apatow that said it, a man whose movies I thoroughly despise, that making comedy is hard, but if you want to make somebody sad, you just kill a dog. And that's true. Making comedy is harder than making people sad, because at our basis, unless some of us are replicants, you know who you are. I've kept telling you you're a replicant for the last 10 years. We are all triggered by the same basic factors that can influence our emotions. To see an animal suffer needlessly is a purest expression of cruelty. It makes us sad, it makes us angry. Again, unless you're a replicant or somebody that's gonna become CEO sometime in the future of some big company and then hunt people in your off time. Things that CEOs do. But getting people to laugh, that takes skill. Getting a lot of people to agree to laugh. Well, okay, no, that's actually not correct, because getting a lot of people to laugh, that's easy. You just get a couple of them to laugh and the rest will follow, or you just put a laugh track on the background and you can make even the worst jokes possible seem funny, you know. The basic sitcom effect, where you are told when to laugh, and because it's delivered in the form of somebody else's laughter, you're not really perceiving it as an order. You can't do that in games. In games you have an audience of exactly one, so you're gonna have to make sure that your jokes land. And by jokes I mean everything, because it's not about telling jokes. The best example I can give to you is the movie Expendables. You've probably seen it. It was heavily marketed as being the return of these classic action stars, and at one point Chuck Norris shows up, and in the middle of it, like when he shows up after he blows up a tank, I think by looking at it, when Stallone and Chuck Norris talk, and they tell a Chuck Norris joke. And by tell a Chuck Norris joke, I mean that they actually tell the joke. Like, I heard that you got bit by a rattlesnake, but it was really badly delivered. Since that was a movie, the joke could have worked by just having Chuck Norris walk on screen with a rattlesnake like clamped to his hand and say, hey Chuck Norris, you got something there on your head. That's my best Sly impression. Chuck Norris looks at it, oh yeah, this thing bit me like a week ago, I think it died, poor thing, and then just flicks it off. Same joke, the version I said had a better delivery, because it wasn't a joke being told at you. It was a joke unfolding. It was comedy. That's the main difference. A joke is something you are told. Comedy is something that you experience. And in games, you have to make comedy. And making comedy is not easy, because comedy has a lot of different components that you need to get right in order for everything to function. You need to have setup. You need to have timing. You need to have delivery. You need to have a punchline, a rhythm. You need to have perfect execution or good enough execution so that everything lands. Because if it doesn't, you may have thought up of the best setup possible, and because something's off, it's just wasted. And doing that constantly in something that is the size of a game. Games are not short, in case you haven't noticed. It's easy to make an episode of a sitcom be funny because what you have 20 minutes minus commercials. That's not hard. Making a comedy out of a game that is hours and hours long, where the player is the one driving the narrative, the action, the interaction. When you're not sure when something is gonna pay off, because the player may hit pause, the player may go somewhere else, the player may look at something else. Doing that in a game, that's not easy. That requires effort, it requires skill, and yet people have done it. People have done it countless times in the past, and quite recently. I mean, the Stanley Parable is a comedy. It's a comedy of absurdity. It's a comedy that is about your character realizing that they're being narrated to by some omniscient narrator that actively begins to antagonize them, unfolding a series of events that you are in control of, that you are participating in, that are funny, that are comedic, that are humorous. You're not being told a joke, you are part of a joke and experiencing it and absorbing it. It's wonderful. And in the past, we've had a bunch of games like these. But a lot of adventure games, that's how they started. They were comedies. Space Quest, for example. It was a great comedy series. One that heavily relied on parody, on satire. It did have some original jokes in there, but for the most part, it drew from somewhere else to build itself. Monkey Island did that to a lesser degree. In some sense, it was the better for it. But if you go in the other direction, you find something like Sociable, a game that is funny sometimes, but it's based almost entirely on referencing something else and not even making a joke about that reference. It's just the reference itself is supposed to be a joke. There's the devil from Diablo and something that's supposed to be funny on its own. We're making a Chuck Norris joke out of nowhere. Or by the same developer, the expansion to the first Dungeons game, which was sort of a parody of Lord of the Rings, where they just took scenes from the Lord of the Rings and try to make jokes about them, not even good ones. It was painful to sit through, painful to play, painful to watch, painful to review. And the third one that has the narrator constantly spouting out references like, oh, this character's gonna do a kamehameha. That's the death of comedy, honestly. That requires no effort. It's not even a payoff, it's just a reference. Not to say that references can be done well. Magicka has a crap ton of references in it. Most of its humor is derived from it. Like one of the first jokes in the game, the safe word is banana, or the safe word is banana. That's stolen from Family Guy. But it's used in its own context. It's used for its own reasons, and it works there. And all the references you find are there with a purpose. They're not just to be a joke. They're there to set up a joke. They're not a payoff. They're part of something grander. And in Magicka, it worked flawlessly. But it also worked because the game itself was comedic in its gameplay. And this is something that a lot of games may struggle with, especially a lot of comedy games. How do you make a game that is funny to experience constantly? I mean, not just when you're put in comedic situations, but when you're playing it. Well, one way to do it was the way that Magicka did it. Have stupid, funny, insane things be able to happen because of your abilities, because of the way you can play the game. But that limits what kinds of games you can make. Previously, one of the only games that could be considered true comedies were the adventure games, because in an adventure game, you mostly had interactions with the environments, and since you, the player, were the one interacting with the environment, it set up the jokes in an even more personal way. Like the chicken with the pulley in the middle in Monkey Island. You find it. You've got no clue what it is. When you figure out how to use it, that's the joke. And because you did it, because you decided, okay, I'm gonna use this stupid chicken with the stupid pulley in the middle to do something stupid. Is this gonna work? Oh my god, it worked. It paid off. I'm a genius. This is funny. This is amazing. That's why a lot of adventure games were comedies. Because it worked. It was a simple delivery method for the comedy. It was a simple way to set it up. It doesn't work as well in other genres. Dead Spank tried it. Dead Spank is a very funny video game. It's got a lot of humor, but its basic gameplay is a grind fest with no joy in it. Other games that did succeed in creating a game that is both funny because it has humorous characters and situations in it, and a gameplay that really enables fun in it, it enables humor in it, is Portal. Once you understand how the portal gun works, you can do stupid, funny, crazy stuff with it. And at that moment it becomes a comedy. And one very important element that is kind of common for Portal and for Magica is that they rely mostly on you having freedom, on you being able to do things that maybe you didn't think you were supposed to do. The LucasArts adventure games, they didn't have that. They relied on the characters, they relied on the situations themselves, on the predefined interaction with those situations, with those characters to create humor. Whereas the Sierra Online ones, they were about, in how many ways can I get my character murdered? And there were a lot of them, and they were funny as hell quite often. Well, unless you just fell into the river because you pressed down and the character didn't know he was supposed to do that and fell in the river. But anyway, that's different matter. It's the idea that random bullshit can eventually create funny situations. That's why open world games can be quite funny, quite comedic. You give somebody some explosives, you give somebody some targets, and the ability to skulk in the bushes or a physics engine. The result can be the madness you sometimes see in Far Cry videos where things explode in chain reactions, causing bodies to fly into the air at lightning speed and then fall down and go splat, and you'll laugh and laugh and laugh. Or there's a famous incident of Total Biscuit making a video of Far Cry 3, and while he was talking about how he could take out a encampment of enemies and you can sneak around and plan things in advance and some such thing, and while he's talking he gets attacked by a crocodile just randomly, and it was the funniest thing ever. And it's something that happens in game with no pre-scripted event, with just a random occurrence. There is a potential of comedy there. It doesn't make Far Cry comedy, it just makes bits of it have the potential to be comedic. Whereas if you take something like Giant Citizen Kabuto or Undead Dangerous, those are comedies, because not only do they have the potential to be comedic in their gameplay, but they're also set up to be comedies in their tone, in their pacing, in everything else, in the cutscene where everybody yells, "Timmy!" for no reason. Well, half of them have no reason, apart from it being funny. Devoid of that context, it would have been a fine game, I guess, but not as good. Not as Giant Citizen Kabuto as we remember it to be. The tone came from the cutscenes, from the characters, from the dialogue, from the setup. Without the setup, without that, the gameplay would have been just fine, impressive, but not really as big a comedy as it could have been. Which kind of leads us to the joke games. Ever since Surgeon Simulator, Surgeon Simulator is a comedy. It is absolutely a comedy. It and QWOP. If you haven't played QWOP, go try it. It's an absolute blast of a comedic game where you control a runner, like an Olympic or, track and field type runner, by controlling the joints of his legs. And it's up to you to figure out how far you can go by trying desperately to understand the mechanics of moving a human leg, which is not as simple as it seems in the first place. But anyway, we went from that to having a bunch of quote simulator unquote games. They're made basically with a rudimentary physics engine and some random stuff happening, and it's supposed to be funny. Sometimes it works. I mean, I Am Bread, it's funny and it's still at the same time a kind of nice game. But other stuff, there's the joke simulator type games, the box simulator, the rock simulator, the something simulator. A lot of them just fall flat because they have no effort put into them. Effort really drives a joke home. It's the work put into setting it up that really makes the payoff that much better. Otherwise, you're left with farted jokes with, oh look, bodily secretions. Those are funny when they come at inappropriate times, right? Okay, yeah, once. They're funny once, but if that's all you have, it's kind of sad, because that's a joke that anybody can make because it needs no effort. It's played out. And a bunch of the comedy games that you can find on Steam right now are more in that category of the gross out humor, the oh look, it's a dick humor, or oh, it's a fart, or oh look, it's another random game with a physics engine and that's funny, yay. Where is the rest? There isn't the rest. There is a very, very big lack of all the rest. There's a lack of comedy games in general. A lot of what's still keeping comedies around in video games are, for the most part, adventure games. Low budget or mid budget, well, depending on how you describe a mid budget. I don't think they're mid, but budgets have gone crazy in the last couple of years. They've been going crazy for the last couple of decades. So it's mostly the low budget adventure type adventures, you know, your Deponias, your Edna and Harveys, smaller adventure games, or smaller action games, sometimes even platformers. They drive comedy onward. On occasion, we will have a masterpiece like the Stanley Parable, but big companies, they'll steer clear of them. They don't have data as fuel for comedies. They know that action games sell, they know that the shooter sells, they know that a game that will make people cry will sometimes sell if they market it as being gritty and dark and edgy enough for the 12-year-olds that are afraid of their feelings. They don't have data for comedies because they haven't made comedies in years that they can use the data from to justify budgeting a comedy. It's a vicious circle. It's a catch-22, I think you could say. And it's the same with movies. There aren't a lot of comedy movies being made, and most of the ones that are, they are horrible. And I mean, they're star-driven pieces of crap written by, well, I don't know who. Maybe they're improvised by people on drugs. Now, Hollywood has its own reasons for not making all that many comedies anymore. Mostly, they suck. The people in Hollywood in general, they suck. But in the video game space, the reasons are not as well founded. Well, no, they kind of are. Monkey Island is a fantastic game, but it wasn't a big seller, was it? None of them were. Space Quest, hilarious game, not a big seller. Bard's Tale, the one before this one, I mean, wasn't what you'd call a blockbuster. The Korean games, they're okay, I guess. Not super duper mega gigantic. Red Dead Redemption 2 was released and it made a gazillion dollars. That's not a comedy. Now you could say that Grand Theft Auto 5, that is the biggest commercial launch of any entertainment product. It got $1 billion in 3 days. That is a bit of a comedy. Yeah, it kind of is. It tries to satirize reality. It tries to satirize American culture especially. But it's not marketed as a comedy, is it? It's marketed as a big budget heist action game. It's marketed as being Grand Theft Auto. Why would it be marketed as something else? It's Grand Theft Auto, it's the biggest brand in video games. And the comedy aspect wasn't really at the forefront of the series for much of its existence. It was present mostly in some of the radio shows, or maybe in a couple of cutscenes, maybe in some dialogue, but it wasn't really at the forefront. In 5, it is a bit more on the surface, not below the surface. It's a bit more apparent. A dark comedy, if you will, sometimes, considering the stuff that Trevor gets up to. And games that did try to copy Grand Theft Auto did start to mold themselves in that comedy veneer. Saints Row especially. It became a really off-the-walls screwball comedy, somewhat, trying to one-up Grand Theft Auto at every turn. And it's a comedy. It absolutely is a comedy. So the series is, well, it's not here anymore. They aren't making one. Or if they are, they haven't said anything about it. They tried that Agents of Mayhem thing and that didn't work. I don't even know what that game was. It was just there at one point and then went poof. So Grand Theft Auto, that is kind of a comedy, and not a lot of people are making them, are they? Comedy is, in its essence, very, very subjective. What may be funny to you may be a tragedy to somebody else. I think Mel Brooks said it best. Mel Brooks being, by the way, one of the best comedy movie creators ever in the history of the world. He said that me getting a paperclip is a tragedy. You falling down a manhole and dying, that is comedy. And some would say that comedy is tragedy plus time. Well, the time is probably here, so I think more people should try and make comedy games. Not games with jokes in them, not a game that's funny because the characters keep falling through the floor, but something that was actually made with effort, with pride, with maybe a lower amount of fart jokes, or something better than an arrow to the knee. Goodbye, everybody.